Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shachi, as Philip mentioned. I'm from ANU, and I'm currently in my third year studying physics. And over the summer, I've been working with Jeff on modeling blazars. So, what exactly is a blazar? A blazar looks like that. So it has a supermassive black hole right in the center, surrounded by this accretion disk, and it has two jets coming up perpendicular to the accretion disk. But that's actually a quasar, not a blazar. A blazar is very similar to a quasar, except the jet is aligned such that it is parallel to our line of sight. So it actually looks like this thing on the left. So you're looking like from the top or from the bottom. So this alignment is actually very important, and I'll get into that soon. So what happens is you have a really strong magnetic radiation through the radiation processes that happens inside. And when we study blazars, we study the radiation emitted. And so in a quasar, you don't. Okay. So in a blazar, these radiations are enhanced in luminosity because of this particular alignment. So that means that when you look at blazars, you would detect a lot more data than you would in a quasar or anything in between that alignment. This is because of an effect called relativistic beaming, which is predicted by aberration of light by the Einstein's theory of special relativity. Essentially, what happens is you have the electron in the jet traveling at relativistic speeds, and in the frame of the electron, which means from the point of view of the electron, you will see light rays either coming towards or going away, depending whether it's absorbing or emitted, from all directions. But from an observer's point of view, you will see the light rays or beam towards the direction of its motion, like that figure down there. So this happens because it travels at relativistic speed, and it's an effect called aberration, but in a classical sense, you can think of this as somebody standing in the rain, and you would see the rain. If he's standing still, you see the rain dropping vertically. But when he's running or walking, then you see the rain coming at an angle. So it changes the incoming angle of whatever that you're observing. So why do we study blazars? Well, blazars are found in AGNs, which means they can help us understand our galactic center and formation of galaxies. And relativistic beaming also makes high energy data much more accessible, and it also gives us a lot more data because it's brighter and more luminous than quasars. Right. So when you study a blazar, you usually study the spectral energy distribution, which is a plot that is like this. So it's a log-log plot that plots fluence against frequency, and fluence is just the flux multiplied by frequency. So why do we use fluence and not flux? Well, this has to do with the power law relation related to blazars. So in blazars, they follow some sort of power law, and this is best studied using fluence instead of flux. So this plot here is actually a synchrotron self-Compton model, which is the model that I've been studying over the summer. And in this model, there are two characteristic peaks that are produced by two different radiation processes, the synchrotron radiation and the inverse Compton emission. So the synchrotron is the low energy one, and the inverse Compton is the high energy one. So I'll just briefly go through the two radiation processes. Synchrotron radiation is really straightforward. You have a magnetic field in the jet, and the electrons in the jet that travels relativistically will spiral around it and release radiation as so. And inverse Compton, as Josh previously mentioned, is just where you have high energy electrons in the jet colliding with the photons and these photons will gain in energy and increase in frequency. So in the synchrotron self-Compton model that I was studying, it predicts that the blazars produce synchrotron radiation, and these synchrotron radiation photons will then collide with the relativistic electron population that produced it to form higher energy photons through inverse Compton scattering. So that means that the flux is dependent on the electron population according to this equation, but this is really complicated. So there's a simplified version that just points out the power law relation quite clearly. And this is for the inverse Compton, and yeah, and that's for the synchrotron. Yeah. So in the model, there are a few very important parameters, like these ones down here. So epsilon 1, 2, gamma 1, and 2, they are the maximum and the minimum energy for the synchrotron and the inverse Compton peaks. So below and above these cutoffs, you don't get any flux. It's completely there, as shown in the plot. And you also have this epsilon break and the break Lorentz factor over there. They are where the spectrum peaks and where the spectral index changes. The spectral index is what governs the gradient on the plot. And the spectral index, there are two, alpha and A, but they're related through this equation. Alpha is the photon spectral index, and A is the electron spectral index. So spectral index is essentially just how transparent the jet is to the photon or the electron. So if it has a hard spectral index, then it's opaque. If it's soft, then it's transparent. So so in my project, what I was trying to do was I was trying to find the best parameters, these ones here that I showed you, the best parameters that fit to data that I have from two Blazars, Parks 2155 - 304 and AP-Lib. And I then tried to use those parameters. Those parameters will allow me to calculate the magnetic field and the radius through a program written by my supervisor. And I will compare those parameters to works of other people on those Blazars. And I also checked the modified code on the way. Yeah, so this is my work on Park 2155 - 304. So as you can see, this part, which is the synchrotron part, it fits the model well, pretty well, but this part here is not very ideal. This part is fitted okay, but you miss all these things over here. I'll get back into this a little bit later, but what I did after this was I took the parameters that I used to plot this curve, and I calculated the magnetic field and the radius of the emitting region, and I compared it to this model by Aharomian et al. In 2009. And yeah, I should mention that they used a slightly different model than I used. It was also a synchrotron self-Compton model, except they used a broken power law model, where I used a single power law model. Broken power law just means that you have several spectral index that characterizes different parts of the spectrum. And single power law just means that one power law characterizes the whole thing. Yeah. So what I found was most of the parameters, they agree within an order of magnitude, except the radius. The radius that I calculated was 5 order of magnitudes larger than what he calculated, which is not very nice. And I was thinking that, yeah, I'm quite sure that I did something wrong, or there might be, I have to change the parameters a bit to make that make a bit more sense, because the Blazars are definitely not that big. Yeah, so, but I didn't look into that problem. Instead, I moved into another problem, which was what I mentioned before, the parts here that were mixed up. So what I did was I changed the parameters a little bit, and mainly the Doppler factor, I changed it from 32 to 40. And what it gave me was this plot that covered some of the parts here that was not covered before. So this was suggesting that there might be actually two components two components of the inverse Compton emission that actually led to the overall data that we have here. That might be suggesting that there might be two separate electron populations that are contributing to this, but I'm not very sure that's just what I think. Yeah, so then I moved on to work on this very interesting Blazar called H.E.S.S. I got this data of a PhD thesis by Sarah Kaufman, and what's very interesting about this Blazar and this data is this part over here. It's the high energy part detected by H.E.S.S. Why is this part particularly interesting? Well, it's because AP-Lib was traditionally known to be a very optically and X-ray bright, and that means it peaks in the hard X-ray spectrum, Blazar. So that compared to Parks 2155, that peaks in the gamma ray spectrum, this is a low energy Blazar. But recently has discovered that it also has emissions in the giga electron volt to tera electron volt range, which is the gamma ray range. So this was very exciting news and made this blazar particularly interesting to study and analyze again. So in the PhD thesis that I was looking in, it was deduced that we needed a combination of two different spectrums that contain that use different spectral indices. So when you combine them, you actually get the best fit. So this one in red has a value of A equals to 3, and the one in blue has a value of A equals to 2. And the black one is just a combination, and as you can see, if you combine the black one with the red one, you get a much better fit than just them individually. So my job was to check if the code that I was, and the program that I was using was able to produce similar results as this. And as expected, I was able to get a plot. This plot resembles the one in blue, and it looks really similar. And the one in red as well. So I just took the parameters that I used to produce these curves, and I calculated the magnetic field and the radius. And what I did for extra in this part is I included the energy density. So I derived my own equation for energy density, and I put it into the code, so it will calculate this for me every time I run the code. And what I found was for the A equals to 3 case, luckily everything, agrees within an order of magnitude. And for the A equals to 2 case, almost everything except the energy density agrees within an order of magnitude. So I suspect why that one went wrong was because it has to do with my derivations of the equation. When I derived that equation, I originally used the full inverse Compton equation, but I got up to a point that I had an integral that was really difficult to do, and I decided to go for the simplified version to avoid the complicated integral and get an approximation to the energy density. So I have to look into that again using the full equation to actually tell whether it agrees. It might, I'm sure. So yeah, so that's what I've been doing over the summer. So as a conclusion, the synchrotron data component in general fits well to the data. Parameters that I obtained were in general agreeing with what other people have worked out, but the radius of Parks 2155 has to be studied again because it's obviously way off, and the energy density has to be looked into again. But other than that, the inverse component data is also much broader than what we usually predict. So that would also mean that we might have to look into the inverse Compton component a bit more. Yeah, and that's what I've done over the summer, and I would like to thank my supervisor, Professor Jeff Bicknell, for guiding me through this very interesting project. And I would also like to thank ANU, the RSAA, and Duke for giving me a chance to participate in this program. Thank you.
Great. Do we have questions for Xiaoqi? What?
So I noticed on the two components that you had very in there.
Yeah.
It seems like you mentioned earlier that if you've got different different Doppler factors, that also changes the relative shape between the locally component and energy component. So if the only thing that's constraining that second component is the high energy data, do you think that Doppler factor is well enough constrained that you can actually have a good constraint on the low energy part on the synchrotron index itself?
Could you say that again? Because I thought.
Yeah. So you've got your two components, right? And this one is affected by the Compton upscattering of the lower energy component, right? So you've only got data points that constrain the high energy end of that that second group, right? But it's the translation between here depends on the Doppler factor, which you said also changes the way that looks. So do you think that Doppler factor is basically I'm saying that the properties of the synchrotron is degenerate with the Doppler factor as well, right?
The synchrotron component is not affected by the Doppler factor at all. It's just the inverse Compton component that is affected by the Doppler factor.
Yeah.
So
the inverse Compton is the one that's actually
yes,
constrained by the data.
yeah. So it's just the inverse Compton part that has the two components, not the synchrotron. Yeah. Sorry.
Any other questions for Xiaoqi? No? I have one really stupid question, because I don't know much about X-rays. But on a couple of your plots, I think you had it marked where the chamber section was. There was some red points and some blue points.
All right.
At the same frequency, I think it's frequency, but different.
Yeah. The red one is the